Hi, I'm Pei. I'm a Year 2 student blogger for NUS High School and I scored an AL5 in my PSLE. Here's my study guide to help you ace your PSLE too. So here's what I'll be covering today. Timestamps will be in the description below, so let's get started. So this is the overview of my spreadsheet that helped me to organize all of my prelim papers, etc. that I use for practice. So let's zoom in to what I put in my spreadsheet. So the first column that I have is called the due date column. This is where I put in all the due dates of the practice papers that I have to finish and helps me to make sure that I'm on track with my revision. The next few columns I have are the marks for each section of the paper. This helps me to identify which section I'm the weakest in after averaging all the marks. Of course, we have a column for the total marks of the paper for me to track how much I usually get for each paper. And finally, the most important section. This next column tells you where you went wrong and some of the remarks on the paper that you just did. These columns tell you where you need to improve on and what you need to take note for the next paper. In primary school, I will make word banks or phrase banks for each topic to prepare for my oral examinations. For English, I will make word cards with words and phrases that I can use based off different topics, and this helps me to craft out answers for the questions that may come out in the oral exam. For Chinese, I will make a set of notes with a topic followed by various questions that will come out, as well as the responses that I will give. After that, I will compile a section with words, phrases, and sentences that are related to these topics. For example, if the topic was on 邻居, then I will write 远亲不如近邻. So for writing, the first thing that I would do is to make a word bank for both languages, and these word banks will contain words and phrases or even sentences that will help to enhance your story. So I will make one word bank for emotions, and I will cover the following emotions: anger, sadness, guilt, shame, and disappointment. I will also make a word bank for weather, like for example, good weather, super hot weather, rainy weather, because it's really good for descriptions in which you can get marks for your English paper, and it's also a good way to start off stories in Chinese or link between your paragraphs. For Chinese specifically, I will have formats that I can use for endings. So for example, I would use a lot of 俗语, which is like 经一事长一智, or 一朝被蛇咬，十年怕井绳, which is like a really good way to end off your story. And with that, I would like to remind everyone to always show not tell, use your 5 senses, and be as descriptive as possible when you're writing your story. The second tip that I'll give you is to make sure that you actually catch the theme. For Chinese, I recommend choosing the picture theme so that you don't like 离题, in which you lead the question, and you can also identify the theme of the story so that you can take advantage of the internal monologue is like related to the theme. Now for higher Chinese, I'll always recommend highlighting the keywords in the question of the paper 1, especially the question in which is a sentence. Another trick to not leave the question is to copy the whole entire sentence question into the compo as an introduction and then use a flashback. Now moving on to English, I want to tell you to make sure that the picture that you choose and the theme is actually tied well into your story, and this will make sure that you get the maximum number of marks. So try to make sure the object in the picture that you chose constantly appears throughout the story. Now this tip for paper 1 is just specifically for the English essay paper. What I would do is to create a story bank with a list of 10 or more stories that I can use in my actual PSLE paper. So I would suggest you write some of these stories that you have thought of and then get your teachers to grade them for you. I would also like to recommend these few books which have helped me to get descriptive phrases and good story ideas. Now moving on to English paper 2, here is some stuff you should take note. That whenever you're done with the English paper, mark it and go through it yourself. Here are some things you should take note when you're going through the paper. Firstly, take note of the synthesis and transformation questions that you get wrong. You should ensure that you know what connectors you need to use for different questions. Next, for grammar or complete clues, take note of what words pair with each other. For example, solve problems or create awareness. For editing, note spelling of very common words like maneuver or embarrass. Throughout the paper, you'll meet new words, so take note of these new words and their meanings. Finally, take note of your weaker sections so that you can find practices to do so that you can strengthen these areas. Now tying this into the first tip that I gave you guys, which was the spreadsheet, I would suggest that you put all of these things that you have noted down into that spreadsheet so that you can quickly revise them before you enter the exam hall. With that, let's move on to Chinese paper 2. Now, similar to English, take note of the meaning of certain words and make sure that you remember them. You might find words with very similar meanings or share similar words, and it's good to take note of how they're used in sentences so that you can eliminate them from the options given in the certain sections of the paper. Next, try to analyze what questions will come up in the actual comprehension passage and think of how to answer to. You can create some formats to answer these questions and these formats have saved my entire Chinese paper, so if you're interested in what formats I use, I might share them with you. Now moving on to math, the first tip that I would like to give you is to practice a lot. Familiarize yourself with many different question types and then gain exposure. You can also put these questions that you made mistakes in into an error book and then continue to practice on these questions. Next, always get your basic concepts down. If you realize that you're weak in a certain topic, I always like to make a super short book of summary notes to condense everything. Since math is an application subject, ensure that you are familiar with the concepts so that you can apply them. Make sure you also know how to solve the heuristics questions and problem-solving questions. Finally, for math, I want to ensure that you gauge your time. Usually, a 1-mark question will take 1 minute and a 2-mark question will take 2 minutes to complete. So plan your time well and ensure that you attempt all the questions for the working marks. Now let's move on to science. For science, I will usually use flashcards as PSLE science requires you to know your concepts well and then apply them into the questions. So an easy way to not miss out pointers is to basically memorize everything, which can be quite painful. But always understand before memorizing. Know the processes that you're memorizing and try to visualize them in a mind map or flowchart. I would also suggest that you use flashcards to ensure that the concepts stay in your head. I use a forgetting curve to plan when I review my flashcards, which is usually every 1, 2, 4 or 7 days and also before the examination. Next, I would suggest you practice a lot as well for exposure to different types of questions. Science is all about application, so know your concepts well so that you know which to apply into answering the questions that they test. With exposure to different questions, you practice applying concepts to different questions and knowing which concepts to apply. In science, keywords is really important, so get used to using the proper keywords. So things like fight or words like fight can be replaced with compete, and greater can be replaced with increase. So know what keywords you should use to answer questions during the paper and form the habit of using these keywords while answering questions during practice.